You're listening to Digital Now, an original business and technology podcast by Logic 2020. I'm your host, Matt Treville. Each episode, I'll be interviewing a new expert to learn more about industry trends, fascinating new tech, shifting customer expectations, and the steps every business can take to stay ahead. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today, I have with me a very special guest, the William Jolly. Fun fact, there is a bridge named after him. I just found this out in my home country of Australia. Anyway, William is a seasoned program manager with over 20 years experience in technology, management, analysis, business operations, and customer service. He is skilled in all aspects of solution delivery, and from the development of strategic plans to business process analysis and everything in between. That was a mouthful, William, because you do so much. But anyway, well, thanks. And just another thing for those listening, you're probably the most interesting man at Logic 2020, and you seem to be able to talk about any topic that has ever come up to anyone. Is this a special gift you've always had?
I would probably so. Yeah, I've been described. Yes, I've been described thusly for quite a while.
Yeah. For context, we walked in the office the other day and gave me an overview of why we have the area codes in our telephone numbers here in the US and why they are so. And it was absolutely fascinating. So I appreciate that, mate. But that's not why we're here today. A little bit of a different topic. We're talking about legacy systems. You ready for this?
Sure.
All right. So firstly, what is a legacy system?
So for most companies, a legacy system is going to be something that is going to be an old entrenched application or application set that they have in their company somewhere. And usually in kind of the defining point is that it's old. So it isn't necessarily that it's bad. It's just that it's, generally people, when they refer to legacy systems, it has a bit of a negative connotation.
Why is that? Why is it why does the age determine that sort of negative connotation?
Well, it's funny. There's sort of the reason they got to be so old in the first place is because they're providing some of this critical business function. Yeah. Because if it wasn't doing something that the company really needed to do, they would have gotten rid of it and replaced it with something else. So it's not necessarily a badge of honor to be referred to as a legacy system, but in some ways it's proven how good the application or the set of function is that it is at doing its job, right? Which is kind of a weird compliment.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of why it's still being used, right? Or they're still being used.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us some engagements, some projects that you've worked on in the past where you've updated legacy systems instead of migrating to a new system?
Yeah, there's a lot of times, and really that, legacy systems, like I said, they've got some of this core functionality that the company is using, and it may be that there's newer applications, there's newer systems out there that'll do the same sort of thing. But moving off of it, a lot of times is really difficult for the company, partially because they've developed a lot of business processes around the legacy application itself, but also because to take the system out of service or to make modifications to it can be pretty costly for the company. So there's a lot of, like, if it's a core accounting platform, or if it's a core billing platform, or if it's a core, inventory management platform, sometimes a lot of times it's a lot easier, or it's a lot more straightforward to make changes to the application itself and to make updates and to whether you're upgrading the hardware or you're moving it from a particular platform to a different platform, from an underlying architecture perspective. That can be done, but at the same time, you're kind of keeping the core elements of what it does and what it does well intact, right?
Yeah.
So worked on some systems like that. But then in other cases, it's, like you kind of hinted at before, sometimes it's worth getting off of the legacy, quote unquote, legacy application to the newer version of the application. And in one case, I was working with a company that had gone around and done some pretty large mergers and had acquired some properties that they'd not had before, and they were using a network inventory management system, which was core to their business for both of these companies. And so when they acquired this new company, they were on a entirely different application, and were upgrading to the new application. And because of the age of the companies, the new application had originally been developed back in the 70s, right? And so the old application they were moving off of was developed in the 80s, but the new one they were moving to was 10, 15 years older. But but it had gotten updates over the course of time, and there were still being changes made to it. It was no longer really kind of the legacy application. It was almost just a term of reference than anything else when they were referring to these two applications.
So in this case, they went back in time.
Like I said, it was originally developed in the 70s, but it had still been getting updates every, 3 to 6 months. There, it was still supported by the vendor. It had moved from, true old, heavy iron data center hardware to, modern, to much more modern hardware that was having to go back and emulate the old operating style and the old operating system of the new platform. So it was, of the new / old platform.
Yeah, new/old. You got to put that slash in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not always the best idea to just automatically upgrade and try a new flashier system, right? But when do you decide that it is actually time to do that? Like what's some things that are some key indicators that it's time?
Yeah, so it's one of those where you kind of it really comes down to a cost benefit question that you're going to go through. And one of the biggest costs to support some of these things is, what are the maintenance costs? What are the support costs? And in some cases, it's the maintenance costs and support costs are very directly visible from, like, if we're running on this older hardware. In the case of this one application I was just referring to, that in order to get anybody to work on the new system, the newer system, to do the migration, we had to hire people that had previously been retired to come and work on it, because they were really the only ones that had enough knowledge about the inner workings of the system. And these were folks that, I mean, honestly, they were retired. They weren't just,
They're
formerly
on a golf course somewhere.
Yeah, they were like spending time with the grandkids, and and they would come back in and they provided the knowledge that we needed with some other folks doing the core inventory upgrades. And they knew how the system worked. They knew the quirks about it, and they were able to bring it to this new operating environment. And yeah, that was one of those questions that, in order to keep doing that support, these folks would eventually age out of the marketplace at a minimum. And so that was one of the things. And then you really look at, is the application able to scale with your business? Are you able to, are there certain things that the company can't, certain markets the company can't get into because you've got limitations from the old platform, right? So in some cases, if you're looking to build a new, product model, or if you're looking to develop a new way of, an entirely new line of business, and the older application isn't able to do that, that's when it kind of becomes, a legacy application. In some cases, it may just be a decision that someone has said, it's time for us to move from one platform to another, for different reasons. And at that point, like I said, the application may still be current and currently supported, and but if they've just decided now it's time to move. So it's, if you think about the tools that Microsoft has had for years for development, as you've gone from the original Visual Studio up to now what's in the Azure DevOps, and the cycle that's gone through for development tools. At some point, those were all cutting edge tools, and at some point they became legacy, quote unquote, legacy applications from a development perspective. And you need to manage that process as you go through. And no one's running, or hopefully there are very few people running Windows 95 anymore.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense, right? Is there, and this is just a sort of a random question here, but is there like a date in time or a timestamp where you would see that it's very few people have legacy systems if the company started at that date?
No. because I actually worked at a different company. Again, like you said, I've done this one or two times, where we were moving off of what they were calling a legacy application, and 6 months later, I was working on a different contract, moving a different company to the exact same platform.
Okay.
Right. So in both cases, they were moving from what they called the old legacy billing system to the new billing system, and went to go work at someplace else. And the new billing system we were moving to is what we had just, what previously just moved off of. And so I actually got I knew a lot more about it because of that. And it was actually really helpful because I've had
Yeah.
that level of experience.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, what are the risks associated with keeping a legacy system?
I think some of them we've already talked about, right? So it's if you've got a true legacy application, you're not able to move into new business markets, right? You're not able to take advantage of things your customers are asking for. You're not able to, and whether that's your external customers or your internal customers, if you're not able to support, some level of reporting that they need because your legacy system is for whatever reason, whether it's the development cycle takes too much time, whether you're beholden to vendors for developing certain components that that your customers need, that sort of thing, those are just not available to you. Those are big things that you need to be aware of when it's time to move off of. In some cases, I've seen companies where you almost get the feeling that they, because it's been 6 or 7 years and it's a matter of there's a lot of things that accrete to the outside of these applications, and they're looking to move to the new version. They're looking to move to a new platform so they can get rid of a lot of other things. That's not always the best reason, but it still is a valid reason that companies can come in and say, look, it's time for us to move off of this. We've got too many other clunky things attached to the outside of it. And we can either move to a new application, which has all of that integrated as a good suite of products, right? Which is in fact a good reason to move off of a legacy application. If you've got 15 different sub applications that are all kind of creaky and clunky and tying into the main one. And you could just have one big new shiny box that has all of these things integrated. That's not a bad reason to move off of a legacy application. But it really comes, it's you really have to look at what the overall company value is, right? And so if there's, like I said, if you're not able to find support personnel to run your old legacy application, if you can't find physical hardware to support it, in some cases, there are times where you've got hardware that people come in and they have to go buy it on the gray market because it's no longer, those parts aren't made by the manufacturer anymore, and this is a part dependent kind of application. It's worked on a voicemail platform that was like that, where they, in order to keep the core voicemail platform working together, they had to cannibalize parts from other parts of the from other offices that the organization had. And they moved the satellite offices to different voicemail platforms, but they kept the main office on this old voicemail platform for various different internal political reasons, which we won't get into.
Thanks.
Yeah. But, and that was one of those things where they did it, and they ended up having, by the time they had consolidated all these down, they still had it and they still had parts that worked. But at some point, all technologies, will fail.
Okay. Righto. So, last question here. If you had one final piece of advice to have for companies who are still working off a legacy system, what would it be?
That they need to figure out if their business is being constrained by the legacy application, and that if it is, they need to make sure that if they decide to do the migration, they don't migrate those constraints as well. Right. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of, I've seen instances where based on the legacy application, there were certain business model constraints. And so the company had really leveraged, they'd maximized what this legacy application could do. But then when they moved to the new application, they ported over all of those business processes that were based on that relatively constrained model and into the new application, and in fact did not take advantage of any of the really good, interesting business value features that were there. So like if they were only able to have one or two customer types, they could only have an individual account, or they could only have a business account in the old legacy system, because that's all it was configured for. By the time they moved it into the new system, they had not redefined what they thought an account structure should look like.
Yeah.
And so they ported that over, and it's like, well, now you can do these other 50 things, but you're not, with your account structures. Well, it's like, that's not what we do. Like, okay, I understand that's not what you do, but you need to make a plan. That's a great thing. That's part of the reason you move to the new cool thing. Let's figure out a plan so we can take advantage of those new cool opportunities.
Yeah. Because that can be such a big value to the business moving forward. I mean, that's why they're migrating in a lot of ways, right? Yeah. So, interesting. All right, mate. Well, that's time. Time flies when we chat, I've noticed. You're just a good man to talk to. So I appreciate you coming today. Appreciate you being on the show, and I'll see you at work.
Yeah, glad to be here. Hopefully I'll see you soon.
Yeah. See you, mate. Bye.
Okay, bye.
You've been listening to Logic 2020's podcast, Digital Now. To learn more, visit our website at logic2020.com or follow us on social media. See you next time.